Welcome, welcome. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. Okay.
Amen.
So hopefully you see the page in front of you now. And we are in this chapter, chapter 27 of Genesis. And we're getting towards the end of that passage where we are dealing with the time when Jacob tricked Esau out of his blessing. And here we have finished the conversation that Isaac and Esau had, and we left yesterday our last lesson with the fact that Rivka was informed that Esau was consoling himself with the idea of killing Jacob. So, she summons Jacob and she says to him, V'atavni, and now, my son, Shma bekoli. Listen to my voice. Pay attention to what I have to tell you. Bekum, arise. Barach lecha, flee. In other words, flee for yourself, literally it means. You flee. El Lavan achi, to Laban, my brother. Charana, to Charan. So Jacob is now going to have to go into exile. And it's interesting because the reason you have to understand that this is all a foreshadowing, Maaseh Avot Siman Labanim, that the events that occurred to the patriarchs are a foreshadowing of what will happen to the Jewish people. And the truth is that there are things in life that are very often, they're ambiguous. The question we've discussed it briefly, was it right of Jacob to ask Esau to sell him his birthright? Was it right for Jacob, in fact, to cheat Esau out of his blessing? And of course, he does that at the advice of his mother. Rebecca is the one who tells Jacob to do that because she feels that Esau is unworthy of these blessings. He doesn't deserve them. And Jacob, doing the right thing, is listening to his mother, does it, but on the other hand, it's not a nice thing. It's ambivalent or ambiguous, excuse me. It is because there are elements of it that are in fact the right thing to do. Esau, in fact, did not deserve the blessing, and the world would be a terrible place had Esau received the blessing. On the other hand, the way in which Jacob achieved it was a pretty rotten kind of thing. And so, as a result of that, of course, he is going to have to go into exile for a lot longer than he thinks. He winds up in exile actually for about 20 years, and then it takes him 2 years to get back to to the land of Canaan at the time. And he never gets to see his mother again, by the way. Here she is telling him to go for a brief time. We're going to see that in the next sentence. Okay. But also because of their sins, essentially, that is the theory that the first reason that the Israelites went into exile and lost their land was because of their sinfulness, because they weren't doing good things. And here we have, in a sense, that exile that Jacob is going to go in, and possibly as a reflection of the negative side of what he did. But here's the funny thing about it, right? On the one hand, Israel losing its land and going into exile was a terrible, terrible disaster. On the other hand, it had occurred to me relatively recently, I'd say within the last 6 months or so, that the destruction of the northern kingdom, because we know that there were two kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah, that was a southern kingdom, and then there were 10 northern tribes that were the kingdom of Israel. Israel was attacked by the Assyrians. They were defeated, and the Assyrians basically distributed. They broke up the people of Israel and basically integrated them into the rest of the empire so that they lost their identity. And that's why we talk about, sometimes you may have heard the expression, the 10 lost tribes. So nothing, right? Except for one thing. If that is in fact the case, it essentially means, and that essentially the 10 northern tribes were assimilated into the Assyrian Empire. In the course of time, you might say that every single human being now who lives on this planet has some Jewish blood in them, has some Israelite blood in them, means they are descendants of Abraham, and that in fact, It's a way that God had of bringing all the people of this world under the banner of having this covenant of Abraham. That in fact, while this is tragic on the one hand, on the other hand, it might actually be the source. If people understood this, it might be a source of amazing blessing. That not only are we related in spirit as human beings, we're actually related by blood as well. So again, an example of something that was tragic, and yet on the other hand, it has, there's uh, other meanings to it, and it may actually be a source of great blessing. And I actually think this is a great theme, of course, of our spiritual journey, and that is very often things that seem to be pretty awful on the surface, sometimes actually bring great blessing along with them. And that is actually part of an idea of saying that we have one ultimate divine creator, just one, and that everything ultimately comes from God. And that means ultimately everything can have a blessing associated with it. All right, so that's the sermon for this morning. Let's take a look at the Rashi. Let's find the place here. If there is one, so I don't see a Rashi on this page. So it looks like we don't have a Rashi on this particular verse. Nope. Okay, going on. So Rebecca is speaking to Jacob, and she's saying, "You have to get out of here, right? V'yashavta imo yamim achadim." So, and you will stay with him dwell with him just for a few years. It says days here, right? But days, the word yom doesn't always mean 24 hours or 12 hours. It doesn't. Sometimes it just means a period of time. So you should stay with him for a brief period of time would probably be a more accurate way of translating this than trying to translate it actually word for word. So just a few days, for a brief time, ad asher tashuv chamat achicha, until the anger, right, the fury of your brother is it is no longer there. It'll return to the place where it belongs, not in his heart anymore. It'll literally tashuv means it'll return, but it doesn't mean his anger returns. It means his anger will be sorry, blocking on a word here, appeased, something like that, right? Okay. He gets over it, right? Okay. Um, Here we go. Achadim. So he says, so in achadim, this word achadim from the word echad meaning one, right? So achadim, ones, literally. Hold on one second. And he translates this as muatim, just a brief, few. Yes, Judith, are you able to unmute? Okay. I'll just go on, but please just raise your hand again and when you're able to unmute, and I'll be happy to take your question or your comment. Okay. So again, she repeats it, Ad shuv af achicha mimcha, until the anger of your brother, right, is appeased from you. It returns, but it doesn't. That's not the way to understand this as the English would mean, right? V'shachach et asher asita lo, and he forgets what you did to him. So again, is it likely that he would actually ever forget how his brother had cheated him out of a blessing? But we also know that very often, when you feel very, very angry, it's a tincture of time, as they say, that in time you can sort of calm down, right, and not feel quite so angry and quite so emotional. And that's essentially what she's saying, is that he'll get over it. He'll get over it. Veshalachti, and I will send, right? Velakachticha misham, and I will bring you from there. And then comma, so it was, or a period, you might say, Lama eshkal gam shnechem yom echad. Why should I be bereaved of both of you in one day? And Rashi's going to explain that somewhat puzzling statement on the part of Rebecca. So that's Rivka's conversation with Jacob. So now we know that Jacob is going to have to leave. And by the way, there is a general principle that exile is an act of atonement. That exile allows you, it's a way of gaining atonement and repentance. Okay, so Memhe, 45. Lama, right? I just want to make sure I'm pronouncing this correctly. Eshkal, Lama Eshkal. And this means "Eheyesh kula mishnechem," meaning that I should be, and of course he's using this word again, but essentially it means bereaved. Why should I be bereaved of the two of you? So the question is, how exactly would that happen? So, limed so first of all, as far as this word is concerned, right? It teaches regarding et hakover et panav, that someone who buries his sons or his children, right? You lose your children, shekarui shakul, that is the adjective used to describe someone who is bereaved of children, who loses children, that it's a special level of bereavement that a person experiences to lose a child. V'chein, and we have another example of this, he says, of using this word. V'chein Yaakov Amar, and so Jacob says later on, and this is of course in the story where Joseph insists that the brothers bring Benjamin down, Benjamin being the only remaining son that Jacob has through Rachel, right? He says, Ka'asher shachalti, and there's that root you can see. So he means there, if I'm going to be bereaved, I'll be bereaved. What else can I do? Essentially, is what he's saying. So, of course, this is a little hint as something that I've said before, that when we read the narrative of Jacob, we actually are reading about character development, which I think is a very powerful technique if you ever read a novel, but it's certainly a criterion by which to judge how good a novel is if you see the characters actually developing. And with Jacob, without any doubt, we see character development, right? From this basically, he's disrespectful. He cheats his brother in his younger age. He's kind of this kind of kid, and although he's not a kid, he's actually even as an adult. And then through life's experiences, he learns some really valuable lessons, and he's a very different person by the time he arrives at Pharaoh, in the presence of Pharaoh, and later on. So, Gam Shnechem, uh, even the two of you. Ve'im yakim alecha, and if this is she's speaking, remember Rebecca, Rashi is putting words in Rebecca's mouth, right? Ve'im yak, I think this is yakum alecha, and should he arise against you, she's saying to Jacob, ve'ata tehargenu, and you kill him. If you, Jacob, succeed in killing Esau, Ya'amdu banav, his sons will arise, v'yahargucha, and they will kill you. And by the way, we do have a midrash that one of Esau's sons, I believe, if not grandson, actually met up with Jacob on his escape to Charan, and in fact tried to kill him. There is that midrash. We may come across it later on. The Ruach HaKodesh, and the Holy Spirit, in other words, the spirit of prophecy, Nizreka, literally it means was cast into her. She had an ability to prophesy. We've had an example of her, that ability, already, just recently. V'nitnab'a, and she prophesied, shebeyom echad, that in fact, ultimately, on one day, yamutu, they would both die on the same day. They would both die on the same day. Kamo shebeforash, as is explained, beperik hamekaneh leishto. So there is in the tractate Sota, right, on page 12, there is a chapter called Hamekaneh, one who is jealous of his wife, right? That's the name of the chapter. There is apparently this discussion where they do a chronology and show that the two of them died on the same day. And when she said this, even though she said it in innocence, right, there was a prophetic nature to what she just said. Going on. Vatomer Rivka El Yitzchak, and Rebecca said to Isaac, so now she's turning to Isaac and she says, Katzti b'chayai, I'm disgusted, literally it means, I'm disgusted with my life. Mipnei benot Chet, on account of the daughters of Chet, right? And the story is, of course, that Esau had married these women, and the Torah actually says that they were a source of pain and anguish to both Isaac and Rebekah. And so now she's making a reference to this. And it's so interesting because she doesn't say to Isaac, it doesn't say to Isaac, listen, Esau's going to kill Jacob because he stole the blessings. We know that Isaac is aware that this has happened, but this is not the reason that Rebecca gives Isaac. She gives a different reason. She says, I'm so unhappy about the marriage that Esau has made, right? Im lokeach Yaakov isha mibnot Chet, if Jacob also takes a wife from the daughters of Chet, Ka'ela, like these, mibnot haaretz, or from the daughters of the land, meaning Canaanites, essentially, right? Lama li chayim. I don't even want to live. Why should I even live? Right. So it's so interesting, right? These kind of universal themes, right, of marriages taking place, and sometimes those marriages being a source of great anguish to the parents of the child. And here is the first time this is mentioned, and this is part of the stories here that become very, very human. So let's take a look and see what Rashi has to say there. So he takes this, again, this expression, katzti b'chayai, is, look, kates means end, right? My life should end, something like that, right? Or I've come to the end of my life. But that's not what she means, literally. She's saying me'asti. That's lim'os means to be disgusted, right? So I'm disgusted with my life. Life just isn't worth, it's just awful. So, on to this chapter now. Vayikra Yitzchak El Yaakov. So Isaac calls Jacob, Vayavarech Oto, and it says, and he blessed him. So that's interesting, right? Because we just read about how Isaac blessed Jacob, but it was done essentially through cheating. And by the way, any action that, or if you're doing any transaction that is somehow based on some cheating going on, is actually null and void. So the question is, are those blessings, even though Isaac, it's interesting because when Isaac tells Esau that in fact those blessings are going to inhere, right? It's interesting because it could be that Isaac actually wanted to bless Jacob. But on the other hand, he felt a certain deference to his son, Esau, or he might have been afraid of him. Esau was a hunter, and Esau clearly was capable of great anger. And it actually talks about the fear that Isaac went when Esau, when he realizes that he had blessed Jacob by mistake. And possibly Rebekah was, in her great wisdom, understood what her husband really wanted to do, but didn't want to put him in that position. So the fact that it says he blessed him here, you could almost say that he was saying those blessings, and now he's doing it in a very conscious way. No cheating going on here. That in fact, here he is saying those blessings are actually going to take place. So I'm doing some speculating here. People are free to decide what they want. I'm just saying the impression that I have from reading these words. At any rate, he blessed him, Vayitzavehu, and he commanded him, Vayomer lo, and he said to him, Lo tikach isha mibnot Canaan. You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Now, essentially, we could try and deconstruct that a little bit. Why such objection? And I can tell you that essentially the reason for this had to do with values, had to do with the fact that they were not just the whole idea which could needs further deconstruction, which is the whole business of idolatry and why idolatry is considered something so awful, within the Bible and within Jewish tradition. But at any rate, the reason why they did not want their sons to marry, and why Abraham doesn't want Isaac to marry a Canaanite, and here why Isaac doesn't want Jacob to marry a Canaanite, had to do with the Canaanite practices that they were actually devoid of any moral compass. They had no sense of moral compass whatsoever. And that, again, goes deeply into the very reasons why we're created as human beings and what significance we have as human beings. That when we abandon our moral compass, we basically are not human beings anymore. And we lose the sense of deserving to be created. It goes back, as I said, to the most fundamental question which we can ask ourselves, which is, why am I alive? Why am I given consciousness? Why do I experience all the miracles that are involved in how my body functions, how this world functions, the relationships, the experiences, all these things? In what sense do I deserve them? And that life, in a sense, is a way of earning that right. So, just a little bit to tell you why this was so problematic for patriarchs and matriarchs. So, onwards. Kum, arise, lech padena Aram, go to Padan Aram. And Rashi's going to explain that this hey at the end of a word, I'll let Rashi do that. So just down here, Padena, kamo lefadan. So essentially, and he gives other examples, beta betuel, so that when they put a hey at the end of the noun, it means it's like the lamed at the beginning. And that's exactly what Rashi's going to say, levet betuel, to the house of Betuel. Kol teva. So once in a while, we know that Rashi will give us grammatical notes about the text, and he says every word shetzricha lamed, which would require a lamed. The lamed, of course, is the prefix that means to, but chilata at its beginning, hatil la hel besofa, it places a hey at the end of the word. So instead of le Yerushalayim, Yerushalayim, that hey at the end means the same thing, to Padan Aram. Okay, going on. Beta Betuel, right, to the house of Betuel. Avi Imecha, the brother of your mother, that's your uncle, right? V'kach lecha misha misha, and from there take a woman, right? In other words, find a woman and marry a woman from there. Mi bnot Lavan, from the daughters of Lavan. Achi Imecha, in other words, your uncle. So you need to marry a cousin. That's what you need to do. Let's take a look. All right, going on. Sorry. El Shaddai Yevarechotcha, and El Shaddai will bless you, Vayifracha v'yarbecha, and cause you to be fruitful. Pri means a fruit, v'yarbecha, and multiply you, make you many. V'hayita lekahal amim, and you shall be well, kahal is a crowd, basically, right? Hamim of nations. So, in other words, to the effect that a number of nations will eventually emerge from you. And we'll stop right here for today. Let's see if we have a gimel here. Yeah, okay. Let me do this one and then we'll stop. The El Shaddai. So this term of El Shaddai, what do we mean? Mi Shaddai bibirchotav lemitbarchin mipiv. In other words, the idea of Shaddai means enough, right? Dayenu, sufficient. It would have been sufficient. So it says Shaddai we're understanding as one who is sufficient in his blessings to those who are blessed from his mouth, In other words, the one who is the ultimate source of blessing. Notice we refer to God in a blessing as Baruch, right? And bracha basically means sufficiency. It does, in fact, mean sufficient and plenitude. That's what the word actually means on its deepest connotation. So that's why he's using this term here to say that, that Jacob is going to have all he needs. So So he that is the one who from whom all blessings are sufficient, Yivarech otcha, he shall bless you. So with this, in fact, we will stop for today. And before I stop the lesson, if there's anyone who'd like to make a comment, please, I invite you to do that. Yes,
I did.
Judith.
Could you
Go
try
ahead.
again?
Judith? Judith, go
I,
ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
um, so I can't remember my first question, but you said when it has a lamed at the beginning, there's a hey at the end. But
Yes.
isn't there often without the lamed and it indicates towards something?
I'd have to think of an example, okay? Because usually that prefix to, all right, or that preposition to either has a lamed or a hey in it. I mean, it does require something to indicate direction to that noun. I know that the word et, which indicates a direct object, often means with, but there are times when it means with. But I can't think of an example of, and if you come up with an example, please let me know.
I'll look for it because I just, in preparing Torah readings, which is, about as much Hebrew as I have mastered, there's often that ending.
Mm.
And I don't hear it in non-biblical Hebrew.
Right. No, no, that's right. It is more archaic in expression. Modern Hebrew would not use it that much unless they're trying to be highly literary. There is something that's literary Hebrew that is actually quite elegant. I mean, really elegant, and sometimes we'll use these sorts of ways of speaking. It's convention that has a certain level of elegance to it. Okay.
Okay, and I wish I remembered my earlier question, but I don't.
Well, that's okay. That's why we write things down, right? What's this?
No, it's
This,
not why I don't think to, but I will think about doing that next time.
right.
Thanks.
It helps. It helps. I'll never forget this Chinese proverb that says that the weakest ink is more powerful than the strongest memory. So
Ooh,
with that
ooh.
bon mot, I will stop the recording.